Hostile worlds, bad systems, cosmic mistakes, ordinary people caught in forces too large to fight. These aren't stories about heroes, they're stories about endurance and what breaks when technology outpaces wisdom. Strap in, check your air. This is Vicious Planets. Net Positive, Vicious Planets, Season 0, Episode 6, by Morgan Olson. Threll Voss had been a tax attorney for 31 years. He had filed returns for arms manufacturers, performance artists, 3 different cult leaders, and one entity he was reasonably certain was a small group consciousness filing as a single person. He had developed over the course of these 31 years a flat affect, a steady note-taking hand, and an internal moral compass that had been switched off in the year his daughter started university and had not been switched back on since. He looked at Threll Voss across his desk. He looked at the documents Vale had brought with him, which were extensive. He looked at the column on one document marked Tier Level Contribution Bonus, Platinum, and at the corresponding number, which was very large. "Walk me through it," he said. "It's complicated." "I have time. There's a non-disclosure component. For your filing, I require complete information. Privilege applies." Vile shifted in his seat. His antennae did the thing they did. "All right," he said. "So, about 18 months ago." "Start earlier. Start with the worms." Vile blinked. "How did you—" Section 9 of the disclosure form mentions a dimensional biological anomaly, and Section 11 lists your occupational category as founder. I read the form. People do not usually live to file as a founder. So, the worms. A small pause, while Vile recalibrated how much this man already understood. "Right. So, I had a girlfriend named Orsa. Threll Voss had blue skin, 2 antennae, played guitar in a band called The Velvet Erosion, and had interdimensional worms. The worms were the part he didn't tell people about. He had not chosen them. They had been administered 18 months earlier by his then-girlfriend Orsa, who had ordered the relevant pharmaceutical from a novelty supplier on the wrong side of the network after a disagreement about whose turn it was to water the plants. The product description had used phrases like temporary inconvenience and small biological lesson. It had not used the word interdimensional, which the supplier later admitted, under regulatory pressure, was an oversight. The regulator had issued a fine. The supplier had paid it. Nothing else had happened, because in this part of the network, this was the kind of thing that happened, and being upset about it marked you as someone who had not been paying attention. Orsa had apologized. Vile had, eventually, in the manner of a man who has slowly realized that his disaster is also a fortune, decided to let it go. The worms occupied a fold of compressed dimensional space adjacent to his lower digestive tract, a kind of biological pocket dimension, in the same way that a coat has an inside pocket, but more so. Properly regulated, the fold acted as secondary storage. Vile, to a normal scale, weighed 68 kilograms. Vile, to a properly calibrated deep mass scanner of the kind operated by the Substrata Corporation at their organic intake facilities, was a freighter. This turned out to be worth money because of what Substrata did with freight. "Stop," Threll said. Vile stopped. "Let me confirm, you have worms. The worms create a pocket. The pocket exists partly inside your body and partly somewhere else. You can put things in the pocket. The pocket is not visible from outside." "Approximately, yes." "How large is the pocket?" 20,000 kilograms at peak capacity. Threll wrote this down. His expression did not change. "Continue." He had spent 14 months working out how to regulate them. This had involved charts, many charts. He kept the charts laminated in a folder labeled Taxes, behind another folder also labeled Taxes, in a drawer he had once considered putting a lock on before realizing that nothing said something is in here like a locked drawer. The charts tracked the worm's dimensional cycle against his diet, hydration, body temperature, ambient gravity, and 7 other variables, which he had identified through the kind of focused observational research his secondary school teachers had always suspected he was capable of. The result of 14 months of this work was that Threll Voss could, on demand, carry approximately 20,000 kilograms of organic material without it being externally visible, and could then unload it, intact, somewhere else. The Substrata Corporation paid him very well for this. They paid him, specifically, the rate they would otherwise have spent on people who could only do it once. The Substrata Corporation did not describe itself as being in the waste management business. They described themselves as resource continuity, which had focus grouped well, and they operated franchises across the network using organic matter reconstitution arrays. These were devices which, though everyone in the galaxy called them the toilets, were technically capable of breaking down feedstock and resynthesizing it into food, building materials, fuel cells, and, once, on Preth Station, a rather good acoustic guitar. The arrays needed organic feedstock to initialize. A new array, on a fresh rock, had nothing to break down yet, and so could not begin to make the things that would attract the people who would, in time, supply it. This was the central problem of Outer Rim expansion, and Substrata had solved it the way most durable institutions solve their central problems, which is by finding a population willing to volunteer for the part nobody examines too closely. "Stop," Threll said. Vial stopped. "The company is a waste management company. They prefer resource continuity. They run toilets." "Yes. And the toilets break down material and rebuild it into things they sell at each location." "Reconstitution arrays. Yes. They run toilets that make stuff." Threll set down his pen, which was not a thing he did. "And a new toilet needs starter material. And you said the word founder." Vial looked at the small plant on Threll's windowsill rather than at Threll. "Continue," Threll said, and picked the pen back up. The solution to the feedstock problem was founders. A founder 8 boarded a transport and committed to the cause in a way that could not be reversed mid-flight. On arrival, the founder became the array's starter culture. This was the service. The founder did not come back because the founder was, in the technical and then the literal sense, the foundation. In exchange, a founder received a commemorative plaque, a discount card valid at any Substrata location they would never again visit, and, in most of the galaxy, a degree of respect appropriate to the non-trivial logistical service they had performed. There were memorials. There were families who spoke of a founder the way other families speak of someone who went to sea. The civilization had made being consumed by a corporation into a thing you could be proud of and had built the plaques to prove it, and on the whole, did not find this strange. Vial was a founder who came back. The worms were the reason. Vial did not become the feedstock. Vial carried the feedstock, 20,000 kilograms of it folded into a space adjacent to himself, delivered it to the new array, unloaded it, and walked back onto the transport 68 kilograms and entirely alive. He could do this as many times as his charts allowed. Every other founder in the network was a single use. Vial was the only refillable one Substrata had ever found. In the Outer Rim independent music scene, in which Vale played guitar, being a founder at all was the single least cool thing a person could do with their biology. Being a repeat founder did not have a coolness rating because nobody had ever needed one. This was why Vial had not told the band. This was also why Vial had a Substrata client liaison named Forv, who sent him quarterly performance summaries, occasional fruit baskets, and increasingly persistent invitations to discuss expanded partnership opportunities, with a department Forv referred to only as research. Vial had been declining the research invitations for 14 months. Forv was getting concerned. Forv was, specifically, getting concerned in the manner of a man who has been told by people above him that a thing will happen, and who would prefer to be the one it happened through, because the alternatives were worse. "Stop." Vial stopped. "They pay you to fly to far-off rocks and become the starter culture for a new franchise." Founder: "Yes. Except you don't become anything. You carry it. And then you leave." "Yes. And you are the only one who leaves." "Platinum tier? Yes." Threll considered the number in the bonus column with new context. He did not look up. When he spoke, the flatness had not changed, which somehow made it land harder. "You are a trash truck," he said, "in an industry that otherwise runs on people who agree to be the trash. Vial's antennae did the thing they did when he was being described accurately and did not enjoy it. "Continue," Threll said. The Velvet Erosion had 3 members. Vial played guitar and sang. Fen played drums and communicated, where possible, through the drums. Drex Sulo played bass and approached every situation, music, money, breakfast, friendship, with the methodical suspicion of a man who had been surprised once and had decided never again. Drex did the books. Drex had been doing the books for 2 years. Drex had noticed something. "Every venue we play," he said at practice, in the specific tone he used when he wanted someone else to explain themselves, "is within 100 clicks of a substrata facility." "That's a lot of facilities," Vial said, tuning. "It's 70% of our gigs." "Substratas everywhere. They're a network. They're a network with a measurable density gradient. We are systematically gigging in the higher density nodes. You've been mapping our gigs." "I've been mapping our finances," Drex said, and noticed a correlation. Fen, behind the drum kit, watched this exchange with the kind of interest a documentary crew has in a slow predator. "It's a coincidence," Vial said. Said Drex, and made an internal note in the place where men like Drex make notes, which is permanent, and which they consult in private. He had a theory. It was the wrong theory. It would have been better for everyone if it had been the right one, because the right one was worse than anything Drex was capable of suspecting about a friend. Palace Minor had the Sediment, which was a 400-capacity venue that mattered. Palace Minor also had a Substrata franchise, celebrating its 3rd anniversary, which entitled high-tier contributors to bonus rates that would, by Vial's calculation, cover the band's travel, the local backline, 4 nights accommodation, and a comfortable margin. Vial had booked the gig and the founding visit on the same calendar. He had not anticipated being seen. Substrata's outer rim facilities were designed to look like spas. Clean lines, plants, soft lighting, receptionists in pale uniforms, brochures that described the reconstitution arrays as the circulatory system of a new kind of economy. The brochures did not mention founders. There was a wall in the lobby of every facility with names on it, under a heading that thanked them, and most visitors assumed it was a list of donors. Platinum tier contributors did not use the front entrance. There was a separate corridor. There were attendants. There was, Vial had learned, a small lounge with better furniture and a fresh fruit arrangement, which Vial had clocked with the resigned recognition of a man who had been receiving fruit arrangements for a 1.5 years. He was being escorted, professionally and quietly, down a corridor he had assumed was private, when he heard, from an adjacent corridor, the unmistakable sound of Drex Sulo saying, "I'm just saying, there are only so many explanations." Vial stopped. Drex stopped. They looked at each other across approximately 4 meters of corporate interior. The substrata attendant escorting Vial looked at Drex, then at Vial, then, with the practiced neutrality of his profession, at a point in the middle distance which contained neither of them. "Hey," Vial said. "Hey," Drex said. His eyes moved from Vial to the attendant to the corridor to the discreet brass plate on the door behind Vial, which read, "Platinum Client Services in the same tasteful, sans serif substrata used for everything, because branding was branding." "My dad," Vial said, hating the words as they emerged, "knows some of these people, management level. He asked me to come by. They were giving me a tour of Platinum Client Services. It's a networking thing. He has connections." "Connections? It's not a big deal." Drex looked at him for the precise length of time required to establish that he did not believe this and did not intend to say so right now. "Sound check at 4, he said, and walked away with the measured pace of a man rearranging furniture in his head. He had decided it was organized crime. He had decided this because organized crime was the worst thing he could imagine, and Drex's imagination, for all its suspicion, had a ceiling, and the ceiling was a great deal lower than the actual floor. "Stop." Vial stopped. "You let your bandmate believe your father was in organized crime." "I implied it. He inferred it. You permitted the inference." Yes. You preferred it to the truth. The truth, Vile said, is that I am a man who is paid to do the only survivable version of the worst job in the network, and that everyone I know would be correct to find that disgusting, and that I cannot explain the survivable part without explaining the worms, and that the worms make it sound like I am bragging. Yes, I preferred organized crime. Threll wrote something down. He did not look up. Continue. Tress Malev had been coming to Outer Rim shows since she was 15, which was 12 years ago, and had developed the immunity to being impressed that comes from watching a great many bands in a great many small rooms and watching most of them mistake volume for sincerity. She had come to the sediment specifically because she had heard the Velvet Erosion EP and been irritated by it. Irritation was, for Tress, the leading indicator of interest. The things she did not care about, she did not have feelings about. The set had not disappointed her, which was its own problem. Afterwards, she had ended up in a corner of the bar with the bassist, who had opinions. And somewhere in the middle of his opinions, he said, in the conversational register of a man deploying significant information, Vile, the guitar player, his dad's connected. Like, connected. We played here because Vile sorted the money, and he's very quiet about how. Today I saw him being personally escorted by management at a corporate facility. We're not supposed to know. Tress said, Connected how? Drex did a small gesture that implied organized crime without naming it, the way people gesture at things they find glamorous. She filed this. She did not approach Vale. She watched him from across the room, where he was nursing a drink with the slightly internal stillness of someone who was not pretending to be alone, but actually was, and her authenticity instrument, quite reliably calibrated since she was 19, returned a reading she could not interpret. The reading said, "This man is hiding something significant." The reading also said, "This man is not performing for you." These two readings did not normally appear together. Performers performed. Hiders hid in ways that were themselves performances. Tress had not previously encountered the case of someone hiding and not performing, and her instrument, faced with new data, did the equivalent of buffering. It was at this moment that a man in a substrata uniform of the slightly senior variety crossed the bar, approached Vile with evident respect, said something quiet involving the words "honored to meet you in person," and shook his hand. Drex, beside Tress, said, "See?" Tress watched Vale's face do a thing. It was a very brief thing. It was the face of a man being publicly confirmed as something he had spent the entire day denying he was. His antennae did a small, involuntary motion. He recovered, smiled, said something polite. The substrata man departed, and Tress noticed, because noticing was her whole instrument, that the man had looked at Vile the way you look at a machine that is more expensive than your salary and is currently working. Drex turned to her with the satisfaction of a thesis defended. "Mob," he said. "Has to be. They don't shake hands like that with civilians." Tress's instrument, presented with this new framing, accepted it with a small click of relief. The conflicting reading resolved. Of course. This was a man performing mob kid mystique while pretending not to. She had seen the move before, Outer Rim sons of money who thought adjacency to danger was a personality. The only thing worse than a broke poser was a poser with mystique. She finished her drink. She left the bar. She went home and removed the Velvet Erosion from her active rotation, with the specific small disappointment of a woman who had hoped, briefly, that the reading would have been something else. She had been right about one thing and catastrophically wrong about the other, and would not learn which for 3 weeks, and the part she had been right about was that there was something there worth wanting. Forv came to see Vile 3 weeks later. This was not standard. Client liaisons did not visit clients. Client liaisons sent fruit baskets and quarterly summaries. Forv arrived at Vale's apartment on a Tuesday afternoon, carrying a leather portfolio and the slightly compressed posture of a man who had flown across the network on his own initiative and was hoping it was going to be worth it, because the version where it was not worth it was a version Forv had been instructed to avoid. "I'm not renewing," Vale said before Forv had finished sitting down. "Vile, I've thought about it. I'm done." Forv set the portfolio on the table with the care of a man placing an offering. "Before you decide, please." He opened the portfolio. Inside were documents. Inside the documents was a number. Vile looked at the number. It was a large number. Research has been asking after you for 14 months, Threll said. I have been protecting your privacy. I have been telling them you are not interested. They are no longer accepting that I am the appropriate channel. I'm not a science project, Threll. You are the most productive founding contributor in our operational history, and you are the only one we have ever filed under the same name twice. Threll said this gently, which was worse than if he had said it any other way. You are not a science project. You are a mechanism we do not understand and cannot reproduce. Research wants to understand it. They believe that if they understood it, they could produce more contributors of your tier, engineered, or recruited from existing populations and treated. The arithmetic of that is very large, Vale. A reusable founder is worth more than 1,000 of the other kind, and they have a great many of the other kind, and the other kind keeps running out. I don't want it. Vile? Threll. I don't want it. I want to play guitar. I want to live in a small apartment. I want a girl I haven't met yet to think I'm someone I might actually be. I do not want to be studied. I do not want to be replicated. I do not want a research division taking samples from the only thing keeping me from being the foundation of a franchise. I want out. Threll was silent for a moment. They will not take this well, he said. He did not say it as a threat. He said it as a forecast, the way you tell someone the weather where they are going because you have been there, and they have not. They don't have to take it anyway, Vielle said. I'm a contractor. I'm declining renewal. That's allowed. Yes, Threll said, in the voice of a man who had a different sentence in his head. It is allowed. He looked at Vielle. He looked at the portfolio. He looked briefly at the small plant on Vielle's windowsill, which had been watered recently and was doing well. For what it's worth, Threll said, after a pause longer than the conversation strictly required, I have always liked working with you. You have been very polite. I have not found this work universally rewarding. You have been a bright spot. Thank you, Threll. I will send the paperwork. Thank you. The fruit baskets, Threll said, picking up the portfolio, will continue, informally. I have a supplier I like. He paused at the door. It is easier, you understand, if I am the one who knows where you are. I would encourage you to let me remain the one who knows where you are. Vielle, who had been briefly moved, stopped being briefly moved. Stop. Vielle stopped. They wanted to clone the worms. It was more nuanced than, or clone you. Either, possibly. And manufacture more of whatever you are, because the other kind dies, and you don't, and the math is large. Yes. And you said no. I said no. Threll wrote something down. For the first time in approximately 40 minutes, he looked up. Good for you, he said, in the same flat voice. Then, after a beat, you understand that no is a thing you said. It is not a thing that has finished happening. I'm choosing to understand it as finished. Continue. 6 months passed. Vielle did not carry 20,000 kilograms of anything anywhere. He played gigs. He was, for the first time in his adult life, properly broke, in the way musicians are broke, not desperately, but conspicuously, with a specific quality of light in his apartment that came from not running the heating during the day. The band noticed his finances had become normal. Drex noticed first. Drex did not say anything, because Drex's theory had no room for the money stopped, and a careful man does not announce a hole in his own theory. Fen, in the middle of a sound check, looked at Vielle across the stage during a long, sustained chord and said, in his entire allocation of words for the day, "You good?" Vielle said, "Yeah." Fen nodded once and went back to the kit. It was, Vielle thought afterwards, possibly the most that had ever been said about anything. The fruit baskets continued. They arrived every few weeks, always fresh, always with no note, always slightly too well timed, as though someone wished him to remember that he was known, and where, and by whom. Vielle's comm pinged. He glanced at it. He glanced at Threll. "Threll, with the practiced patience of a man who had spent 31 years being interrupted by communications that were probably more interesting than tax filings, gestured for him to answer. The message said, "I heard you left Substrata." Vial read it. Then, after a pause that suggested revision on the sender's end, Drex told me. He'd been telling me for over a year that you were some kind of mob kid, and I had believed him, more or less, because you did this thing whenever the topic came up that read as performance. I'm a good lie detector. I'm not a great lie interpreter. I had you wrong. Then, he found a forum, by the way, about the worms. He thinks your father gave them to you as some kind of inheritance. I don't think that's right either, but I'm prepared to be wrong about a lot of things this week. Then, I thought you were another broke, sad-eyed guitar player who thought poverty was integrity. Then I thought you were a poser with mob-adjacent mystique. Turns out you were the one thing standing between yourself and a wall full of names. You carried a freighter's worth of it across the rim so the rest of us could keep a deposit on our nice, clean economy, and then you walked away from more money than I will ever see, which is somehow much more interesting than either of the things I thought. Then, I don't know what that says about me. Then, after another pause, are you free on the 14th? Vial's antennae did the thing they did. He wrote back, the 14th is good. I should probably tell you about the worms, she wrote back in 30 seconds. I know about the worms. Drex found a forum. He wrote, how accurate is the forum? She wrote, 60%. They have the dimensional fold right. They have the origin completely wrong. There is a thread speculating you are a government experiment. He wrote, I'm not a government experiment. She wrote, I gathered. A government experiment would have better fruit. He set the calm down for a moment and then picked it back up because there was a thing he had to say once to know whether it could be said at all. He wrote, the people I worked for would like to make more of me. I told them no. They are not, in the long run, a no kind of organization. I am telling you this on the 14th regardless, but I would rather you knew before you bought the cheese. She wrote back, and the 30 seconds this time felt longer. I have spent 12 years calibrating an instrument to tell me when a man is more dangerous than he looks. It has never once gone off about the danger being aimed at him instead of by him. Bring the cheese yourself. I want to see what it does in the room. Vial set down his comm. He looked at Threll, who had been watching with the polite middle-distance gaze of a man who could read a comm screen across a desk and had elected, for professional reasons, to pretend he could not. Sorry, Vial said. Not at all. Where was I? You had just declined the renewal. 6 months had passed. A drummer named Fenn had said 2 words, and an organization that does not take things well had not yet, by your own account, done anything about it. Threll turned a page. Continue. That's approximately where it ends. Threll looked at his notes. He made a final notation. I can file all of this, he said. Thank you. I'll categorize the founding contribution income as cargo transport revenue. Specialized cargo. There's a precedent. We will not itemize the cargo for reasons that are now obvious to both of us. Thank you. The non-disclosure component will require careful structuring. Substrata's legal department is, I am told, energetic. They are energetic in the specific way of an organization that has a great deal it would prefer remain a list of donors. I appreciate it. Vial stood. He gathered his documents. He paused at the door. This is all, he said, between us, right? Privileged. Threll looked up. For tax purposes, he said, with caveats. Caveats. I am required to disclose certain categories of information if subpoenaed. I am required to disclose certain other categories if my partners review the file. My partners are reviewing all files this quarter as part of an internal compliance audit, the terms of which were updated last spring after our firm took on a new institutional client in the resource continuity sector. He let this sit, flatly, for exactly as long as it needed to. I also host a podcast on weekends about unusual cases. I anonymize, of course. You host It has a small but devoted audience. One never entirely knows who is in it. Vial stared at him. But for tax purposes, Threll said. Between us, yes. Vial's antennae did the thing they did. Mr. Quass, Threll said, returning to his notes. I will need you back in 2 weeks for the second filing. Right. Bring the woman, if convenient. Spousal status affects the bracket. She is not my spouse. Not yet. The bracket adjustment is anticipatory. Vielle left. Outside Threll's office, the sun was good. He had a plant at home that needed water. A woman named Tress was bringing cheese on the 14th and had, in the same breath in which she'd agreed to come, told him she wanted to be in the room when the danger arrived, which was either the worst possible response or the only one he could have lived with, and he was fairly sure it was the second. He had also, in some sense, just narrated his entire adult life to a man whose firm had recently taken on a client in the resource continuity sector, who reviewed his files quarterly, who answered to partners, who could be subpoenaed, and who hosted a small podcast for an audience one never entirely knew the membership of. He thought about this. He found that he didn't mind as much as he should, and then he understood why, which was less comforting than not minding would have been. He didn't mind because there had never been a version of the last 18 months in which he was out. He had been a founder who came back, in a galaxy that built walls of names and called them gratitude. And a thing like that does not get to resign. It gets to be temporarily not in use. The fruit would keep arriving. The number in Forbes' portfolio would keep existing, somewhere, patient, attached to his name in a file that other people read. He had not escaped the machine. He had stepped for a while into the part of it where the light was good and a girl might bring cheese, and the machine had let him because the machine could afford to wait, and waiting cost it nothing, and it had a great deal of him still to want. He picked up his comm and wrote, "Just left the tax attorney. There is a non-zero chance you hear about me from a podcast in roughly 3 months. Forewarning." She wrote back, "I don't listen to tax podcasts." He wrote, "Apparently this one has a small but devoted audience." She wrote, "Then I'll find out who's in it. Bring the cheese on the 14th and tell me yourself." He put the comm away. He walked home in the good light, 68 kilograms, entirely alive, carrying nothing, watched, wanted, and for the moment, free in the specific way a thing is free when the people who own it have simply not yet sent the transport. He found as he walked that this was sufficient. It was genuinely sufficient, and he was genuinely happy, and none of that had any bearing whatsoever on the math. What a episode. Makes me want to go get into a relationship right away.
Net Positive is a work of fiction. Substrata, resource continuity, the reconstitution arrays, the founding contributor program, and all persons, planets, bands, and interdimensional worms depicted herein are entirely imaginary. Any resemblance to real corporations, living, dead, or incorporated, is purely coincidental, and not something we would encourage you to pursue. No real persons were processed in the making of this episode. The voices and music were generated using AI. The images were generated using AI. The worms were generated by Orsa, who has apologized. This program is for entertainment purposes only and does not constitute tax, legal, financial, or biological advice. For tax advice, please consult a licensed professional, ideally one who does not host a podcast. Thank you for your contribution. Your name is already on the wall.
And always make sure your air tanks are working.